Welcome to Windows on the World. I'm here with Tony Hurst, and we're going to have a special guest later on, someone who's no stranger to this show, Piers Corbyn. And we've been covering the bigger picture of regeneration, and we often talk what's behind this regeneration, the bigger picture of what it really is. And since we've been talking about this, which is a few years now, I've been getting contacted by people all over the country, and most recently people have been phoning me up. I got a phone call on Saturday from somebody who lived in South London, and he was telling me that everything that we're saying on the show is absolutely true, and it's happening there. And people are very concerned about what's going on. In other words, they are being pushed out of the housing market. We've got this high density housing, which is meant to be affordable, which is not affordable to most people. Well, the ones who are phoning in anyway, because they're not part of the elite. They're probably part of the part of the population which is being socially cleansed out of London. And I got an email the other day from a chap who's in a rural area. And of course, this agenda is to depopulate the countryside, and it's all about urbanization. And we're going to be talking about that a bit later in the show with a conference called Habitat. Now, have you heard of that? Has anybody out there heard of it? I bet you haven't. And funnily enough, their YouTube site, which is behind all this stuff of Agenda 21, and their YouTube site, the UN Habitat Worldwide YouTube channel, has far less subscribers than Windows on the World. It has 4,572 subscribers. It has many videos, and the videos get very few views. And what's interesting about it is these bureaucrats, these kind of faceless bureaucrats, are presenting on Skype and to camera in these pretty poorly made videos all this stuff which is affecting us, and all about the urbanization, what's behind it. And the stuff they're saying is genuinely quite shocking when you hear it, but they present it in such a dry and boring, it's in fact paint-dryingly boring way, that a lot of the actual content of it just sweeps over because you don't really take it in. But I wanted to play a couple of these actual audios from their site, and I'd like Tony to play one. Let's see how Tony is first. How are you, Tony?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Mark. Had a good week.
Excellent.
Getting things done. Yeah. Looking forward to the show, as always, and Piers, always good company, eh?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And, yeah, just before we go into those audios, it's just this Habitat conference. The one this year is in Kuala Lumpur. And basically what they're doing is they're talking about urbanization. And what's interesting is when you read this stuff properly, what they're actually saying in effect is that business expansion, in other words, people with businesses, are actually going against what their principles are. Now that might sound really strange because they always say things like we want to help small businesses. Well, for instance, what I'm seeing on local councils' Twitter feeds is basically a uniformity, and it's all about getting the public to work for nothing. Basically, citizens' work programs. And I tweet back to these councils and talk about them as the comrades of our glorious leader, and we should be doing basically swaps with our work program with North Korea, all this kind of stuff. I put a lot of jokes up there, and of course you never get a response. But when you look at this stuff, it's a constant feed, and it's going on everywhere, and it's uniform everywhere around the country. They're getting people into these work programs. In effect, they're getting people to tidy up their own boroughs. Now people say, well, that's a good idea, isn't it? Well, it's like the Obama thing where he had the Obama army. This is all communism. What it is, it's getting everybody to work for nothing, and everybody to spy on each other, and everybody to be working for the state. So in other words, it's the state through the council is the state, making you part of their work program. And of course, we've got to remember that these people in local councils are getting paid fortunes, and they expect the public to do the job that the council should be doing for nothing. The voluntary sector, this is what we hear about all the time. The voluntary sector is incredibly important because what it does is it puts a front to the draconian measures of Agenda 21. In other words, you see lots of people who seem to be enjoying themselves, doing little community activities, and little old ladies running around making cups of tea in community hubs. But that's not what's going on, because we've got to remember this is a completely corporate-backed agenda. And if we want to go into this, we need to look at the UN Habitat website. But first of all, I'd like you to play one of those audios, Tony. Play the first one if you can.
Right.
And this is from Habitat.
University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Currently, at the global level, there are three major conversations. One conversation has to do with peace and conflict. A second conversation has to do with climate change. And a third conversation has to deal with inequality. Underlining and critical to those conversations is urbanization. Never before has urbanization been so important. Because if we don't have sustainable cities and human settlements, we're going to have plenty of conflict. Let me give you an example. When I talked about sustainable, resilient, safe, and inclusive cities and human settlements, I'm talking about that arrangement in a nation where we have total synergies among regions that contain cities and human settlements. Now think about it for a minute. We have a huge dependency between the cities and their what geographers call their hinterlands, their rural areas. We can't have one without the other. We need sustainable cities to protect the fertile farmlands, to protect the ecosystem services. We need sustainable human settlements so that we can have the communications, we can bring the agricultural products that the city demand is going to call for into the cities so that we don't have the waste that we have today because of inefficient systems. We can bring the health services that emanate from the cities out into the country. In other words, there's an enormous amount of cooperation and synergies that we need to be engaged in promoting as a way of addressing these issues of peace and conflict. Have we had examples of conflict? Yes. Think about 2008. Remember when the price volatility of food was so high? You remember when people couldn't eat? What happened? They went to the streets. They said, "Where is our bread? Why isn't this working?" That's just one example. We don't want to have those kinds of situations. Let's talk about climate change. Second global conversation. What's happening with climate change? Where is the greenhouse gas being produced? Well, guess what? It's in cities. And where do we have the biggest chance of making a dent in that? But in planning those cities in such a way as they're energy efficient, they're low carbon, they're not producing the greenhouse gases they're producing today. How do we do that? We create walkable cities. Who produces the greenhouse gases? There are two major sources, transport and buildings. So, what do we have to do? We have to design those systems, our shelter systems, our transport systems, in such a way as we can reduce the greenhouse gases, and that's where we have impact. Third thing, inequality. No nation has ever reached prosperity without urbanization. That is a fact. However, no nation has reached shared prosperity without paying attention to the inequalities that might exist in cities that do not function in a way that provide for everyone. And therefore, the fastest way to deal with the inequality issue is to deal with creating cities that provide opportunities for all. And that's what we're all about, and that's what we see the new urban agenda calling for in the future.
Interesting, eh, Tony?
Yes, nice and fluffy.
Well, in actual fact, I find it very sinister because these people are completely detached from what they're actually talking about. These people are academics and bureaucrats. And as I said, when I listened to some of their videos, I mean, that one I found was like something coming out of a sci-fi nightmare because I know what she's actually talking about. And people will go, well, she's talking about great things like walkable cities. What's wrong with walkable cities? Well, there's nothing wrong with walkable cities. But there is something wrong with the flawed premise that they're doing this from. I mean, but how did this flawed premise come about? And when they talk about prosperity, they change it to shared prosperity. Well, shared prosperity under this program is poverty for all. One level of poverty for everybody. And what's very disturbing about this is she was talking about food price volatility. Now, this, of course, is all manufactured. And if the UN are in charge of food and water, what could possibly go wrong? Well, they say, the UN state, each citizen has the right to healthy amounts of food and clean water. Now, wait a minute, that sounds good on the face of it, doesn't it? But they're defining what healthy amounts are. And we have to remember that the UN are trying to get everybody to stop eating meat. So what they want is a load of disempowered people eating peasant diet, which you can't really think on. You can basically function, and having water restricted. And I want to bring something in now, which is very important, and it will become clear as we go on why I've brought this up. And it's about California, and it's about the restriction of water. Now, this is from 2014 actually, but I started to become aware of this many years ago, and I talked to a lady called Deborah Tavares in California, and you can look at her YouTube channel. It's called Stop the Crime New. She wasn't active for a couple of years, but she's come back and she goes to a lot of public meetings, and she uses examples which most people will find quite frightening. But we've got to remember, what they're building is a grid. This is a total control grid with 5G, and the 5G that they're bringing in has not really been tested, and it's been stated that it is a danger to health. We can't go into that tonight because we've got too much other stuff to get through, but we will go into this. Now, on Richie Allen, there's a chap called Mark Steele who went into Gateshead council chambers, and he's an engineer and he's an expert in radiation and electromagnetic frequency waves, and he was saying that this stuff isn't safe. It's not been tested, and there was 30,000 lampposts that had this smart grid technology on, and it's all linking together. So he was extremely concerned. The people in the council are very much like the bureaucrats everywhere. They're yawning their way through these meetings, and they're sort of sniggering as though it's some kind of conspiracy theory, but they have no knowledge apart from the World Health Organization stating that it's safe, nothing to worry about here. Well, none of it's been tested, and the only person who's actually done extensive independent testing on mobile phone technology is Ole Johansson at the Karolinska Institute, and he states that it isn't safe. When the phone companies get their lobbyists to do the safety tests, well, they get what they want, they get what they pay for. This is the consensus reality. This is the post-truth world. So when people trust government, they are in trouble, especially as far as this stuff goes, because it's being implemented by these completely faceless bureaucrats. But this is from the Breitbart website, and it said California laws restrict groundwater use on private land. On private land. It's very important. Now, if you've got a well on your land, you should be able to use that water, but they want control of it. And this is a big part of what's going on globally. There's an organization actually called WaterAid, and they're always advertising on Facebook, telling you how they're bringing clean water to these people who have only got dirty rivers and muddy ponds, you know. But what it's actually about is controlling the whole infrastructure through water, because part of this agenda, which we're going to get onto later, is this restriction of rights, property, food and water. So when the UN say each citizen has the right to healthy amounts of food and clean water, we have to question what they mean by that. It's a little bit like affordable housing. Well, if you've got enough money for it, it's affordable. And their definition of what they want you to eat, again, is pretty much going to be a vegetarian diet. So basically it's a feudal system with serfs eating unnourished, being undernourished basically. That's what this is about, in my view, and from the research that I've done. However, let's get back to this. The California laws restrict groundwater use on private land. With the stroke of his pen, the governor changed over 100 years of water laws without the people's input. This is not the democracy Californians deserve. That was State Senator Jim Nielsen. It carries on. In the midst of drought and heightened overdrafting problems, California passed legislation allowing the state to control and regulate the use of groundwater on privately owned land. Citizens previously free to use whatever water was underneath their own land are now preparing to challenge this governmental undermining of their property rights in court. Now that landowners will no longer have full rights to the water underneath their own property, the state will have the final say on how much groundwater should be used, complete with power to enforce fines and fees. The new laws will create agencies to function as water police. Landowners will be required to register wells on their property, which will be monitored with water meters and subject to inspections without consent. If they don't comply with standards set by faceless bureaucrats, they'll be subject to penalties or even have their wells shut down. Restrictions could seriously affect local farmers who use groundwater to grow crops and feed livestock, not to mention use in their own homes. These same farmers produce a considerable percentage of the nation's produce. Increased regulation may also negatively affect land value. The state legislature apparently didn't trust the public enough to include them in deliberations. Perhaps they feared the public wouldn't support new measures, which will likely intensify existing regional water tensions, pitting the little guys against the big boys. The new regulations also conveniently exempt the largest consuming counties like Los Angeles and their basins. The bills were hastily cobbled together without regard to historical legal precedent. This is very important because what we're finding out with a lot of this new legislation, it goes against our inalienable rights. In other words, if you have a well on your land and that land is private, then no authority should come onto your land and take that away or restrict it in any way. This is very unconstitutional. But what we're going into is this new feudal system of global communism. Now, this is also interesting. When I speak to people who phone up the show, after a few minutes, I throw in this idea and say, well, we are living now in a communist country, and nobody who has phoned me up has disagreed with that statement. Absolutely nobody. And I'm finding more and more people are in agreement with it, because we are having this nanny state iron fist right in our face, and it goes into what's happening with this recent case. This guy, Count Dunkula, who taught his dog to do a Nazi salute and said something about gassing Jews, and the next thing, he's going to be put in prison. Now, this is very, very disturbing. Now, whatever you think of that statement, it's up to you whether you're offended or not. And we all have the right to be able to have our own opinions, have our own thoughts, and express them. That's the whole point. And what we're finding is through these hate laws. Now, it seems to me that the police are now not attending real crimes, but creating these hate laws. Because I've had change agents come onto I don't use Facebook much anymore, but I've had change agents and people who are hysterical coming onto my Facebook page about things I've posted, not even about things I've said, and they're saying, I'm reporting you for hate crime. And I just can't for the life of me think for what, because I look through it and these are basically news items, or they may be, some of them may be opinion pieces, some of them may be our shows, some of them may be statements that I've made, but none of it falls under that category. So this is really disturbing stuff, and this is what iron fist, the communism, this new form of communism, which is basically corporate, is a corporate structure that's been put in place. And we have talked about this before, but this actual program of taking away rights, and the first plank of communism is obviously that there's no private property. So this is all coming together into something that people are now starting to see, because I was talking to Sandy Adams today, who came on our show a while ago and will come on again, and she was saying that people in her area are now not calling her a conspiracy theorist anymore, because they're seeing this stuff and they're seeing these people come in and take over. She's got a venue down there which has local shareholders. One of her friends is a shareholder, and her friend has now been told that they don't want her as a shareholder because she's asking them basic things about the financing of the actual venue. And we've had this with our venue. We've had this in North London. I'm going to do a full report on it people coming in and taking over. And this is what it's all about. And it's on a level that people just can't imagine. And we do talk about it a lot. I'd just like to read this out, actually. It's from somebody called George, and he lives in a village. And he said, I thought you might be interested to know that first Royal Mail shut our village post office. Then the shop that was in it shut. Then they shut the post office in the village in the other direction, and the shop it was in shut on the same day. Then they opened a post office in the cafe. They have repeatedly cut the hours that is open until it is now just 2 days a week, 3 hours each day. Now, the woman who runs it doesn't turn up most of the time, so I have to walk to the mobile post van, which is also supposed to come 2 days a week for 3 hours and a day. The thing didn't turn up the other day, and when I asked in the cafe and shop, they said it didn't turn up last week as well. All of our country is being privatised, and we are being reduced to the level of serfs in a new techno-feudalism. Thanks for your attention and efforts, George. Now, that ties into what we've been saying about the countryside. There's a depopulation programme getting everyone out of the country. This urbanisation that these faceless bureaucrats are talking about is pushing everybody into cities. And it hasn't been thought through. There is no room for individuality in this. This is communism. This is the local authority becoming Big Brother, surveillance. And before that might be a good time to actually bring this up when I'm talking about surveillance. And I can actually reliably inform the listeners that Piers Corbyn is in the building and will be joining us quite soon. I'm just going to get onto this, which is quite shocking, and it was sent to me a couple of weeks ago. We didn't have time to put it on the show, but this is from The Intercept, and it states, Amazon partnership with British police alarms privacy advocates. So get that, Amazon partnership with British police. Okay, let's see what it's about. Police in Lancashire, in northwest England, have rolled out a programme to broadcast crime updates, photos of wanted and missing people, and safety notifications to Amazon Echo owners. Since February, the free app has been available to those using Alexa, a cloud-based voice assistant hooked up to the Echo smart speaker, the first of its kind in the UK. The programme was developed by the Police Force's Innovations Manager in a partnership with Amazon developers. Now, this ties into an app that was put out by a private company with the police, which has not taken off at all. People just weren't using it. And the company's in serious financial trouble now, I think. But this is very disturbing stuff, because we've reported on the abuse of Crime Stoppers and what Crime Stoppers really is, which is nothing to do with protecting the public, in my opinion, because we had hundreds of people taken off Crime Stoppers on the back of one person who was put up there who shouldn't have been on there, and it prejudices trials. It makes people go on the run because they may not know they're wanted, they may not know there's been a court case, and a lot of the people on there aren't really wanted for anything at all. They might be wanted in connection with something. But what's really disturbing about it is this is the naming and shaming of people in public. And of course the council have been doing this for years with businesses. If you put your rubbish out on the wrong day, you're named and shamed for littering. And there was even a local newspaper, and I got it taken out because I kicked up a big fuss about this, and it was called Named and Shamed. And you think, oh my God, these are the people who are committing heinous crimes, you know, and they're not. There were business people who'd put the wrong sign in their window, or had put their rubbish out on the wrong day, or had put something in the wrong bag. And this is absolutely incredible. But then again, Comrade Lokes of Waltham Forest and Leytonstone is well behind this, and his student exchange program with North Korea is going very well. And if you actually confront these people, they are incredibly arrogant but very funny. But the problem we've got is they're wielding quite a lot of power, and that's the worrying thing. But I'll carry on with this anyway. That was a bit of digression. The program marks the latest example of third parties aiding, automating, and in some cases replacing the functions of law enforcement agencies. Replacing the functions of law enforcement agencies, and raises privacy questions about Amazon's role as an intermediary. Lancashire County will store citizens' crime reports on Amazon's servers rather than those operated by the police. I'll read that out again, because people need to get their head around this. Lancashire County will store citizens' crime reports on Amazon's servers rather than those operated by the police. So in other words, this is no longer a police issue. The police are partnering with Amazon.
Wow.
If we can, what do you think of that, Tony?
I just think it's probably one of the most amazing, outrageous statements that you've made, and you've come out with some, and they've all been true. So, just
I'm telling you what they're saying, what they're doing. This is the policy. So, I mean, the thing is that nobody can discredit what we put out, which is what I really like about our shows, because I think the only show we've ever done on a conspiracy theory was about the death of Paul McCartney, which has had nearly 200,000 views, and I can't for the life of me think why. I mean, to me, it's if he was replaced, kind of so what? But then again, it means a lot to people. But this is the thing, you see, it's that people's values are very skewed when it comes to things like entertainment. Of course, the Beatles were a great part of many people's lives, but I just call the video "Who is Paul McCartney?" And it was a conspiracy that was looked into by Nick Colostrum, and Nick was actually adamant that Paul McCartney had been replaced by Viv Stanshall until I told him it was absolutely impossible. And we were in the Bell Pub in Walthamstow where the Bonzo Dog Band used to play. So I'm sure that their Sunday gigs might have got in the way with him being in the Beatles, So, slight side issue.
Yeah.
But... sorry, Tony.
It is fascinating what people prioritise, that's for sure, when it comes to their entertainment or their research or just how they spend their time in general. It is pretty shocking, and it is a testament to how we're in this situation that we're in today, because people have got their eye off the ball, mostly. Most of our listeners.
It's always been like that, but we provide this information for those who will listen and those who are interested. And what's great, I think, is that this chap called Chris phoned up last week, and he's such an interesting fella, and he was in the music business, knows a lot of stuff, was very clued up on things and huge knowledge, and we were on the phone for about an hour, and he said he'd listened to the show, found it really interesting, and it was all true, and he was trying to spread the word, and I'd like to think that we have a very high class of listener, because they all seem that they're not people who run away with what gets put out on a lot of the so-called conspiracy sites.
That's right.
And I think that's important. I think, Tony, we've had this conversation before, that sometimes you may think that I'm down on certain subjects, but it's generally because I have looked into them over the years, and I was around a lot of these people I would call a bit hysterical, well-meaning, but with this stuff, I think you have to present it in a fairly sober way, but I think you should also have fun with it. I think that the whole paradigm that's been created needs to be dissolved with humour, because when you actually point out how ridiculous this is. So my dog put his paw up and gave a Nazi salute, and now I'm in prison. I mean, all right, there's slightly more to that, but not a lot. Then that is pretty serious. But of course, the main story of the past 2 weeks has been Ant McPartlin getting done for drink driving, and that has been the main story. Now, I've got nothing against Ant and Dec. In fact, I met them in 2006 at an event, and they were brilliant. I just went up to them, they did an interview, they were a good laugh, they acted like a pair of clowns that people know and love them for, and they were extremely professional, and they thanked me at the end of the night. So I've not got a bad word to say about them, but the point is that this is slightly trivial compared to what we're talking about, and of course not everybody wants to engage in it, and not everybody can do, because they're tired out with what's happening to them, and that's the whole point. The whole point of this new feudalism is to create that. So in other words, people are busy all the time, and they're worrying about a roof over their head. That's the global action plan of UN Agenda 21 in a nutshell: global poverty for everyone, and they're going to look after you. So they've taken it upon themselves to look after you, and you only have to look at the UN's human rights record in the respect of they're using basically mercenaries in different countries to go in and rape women and treat people appallingly, and they're known for it. So why should we be letting them have governance over us, over the world? Well, we're going to get to that in a short while. But yeah, getting back to this Amazon thing, it is incredible And it carries on. It says, if we can reduce demand onto our call centres, this is the police, right? If we can reduce demand into our call centres via the use of voice recognition or voice-enabled technology and actually give the community the information they need without them needing to ring the police, then that's a massive, says Rob Flanagan, Lancashire Constabulary Innovations Manager. He told the College of Police in that. But broadcasting is just the beginning of the county's plans. The next iteration of the pilot programme, expected to launch by year's end, will allow users to report crimes directly to their smart speakers. After that, Flanagan imagines that Alexa might be used not just by civilians, but internally by officers for briefings and important information. Now, this is trivialising the whole of policing and what it's about. The cop would be able to say, give me the warrant details for Joe Bloggs, and then it would read back the person's warrant and details and send the information to the officer's mobile device that they have on their person. So this, again, is what we had years ago when people would get a text message that there's a warrant to clamp their vehicle by text. Now that is impossible because you can't send a warrant of execution in a text message just by a text, which is what they were doing. But this takes it into a completely different league. It says, to David Murakami Wood, a scholar of surveillance, says the programme serves as a startling reminder of the growing reach that technology companies have into our daily lives, intimate habits and vulnerable moments, with and without our permission. Alexa is hardly the first of our personal devices to be transformed into a police hotline, and given the sensitive nature of crime reporting, civil liberties experts wonder whether storing reports with a third party like Amazon might pose an obstacle to citizens hoping to report crimes anonymously. Well, that's another interesting point, because now you can report crimes anonymously. You can report hate crimes on many different websites completely anonymously. So let's look at this. So you can make up something about somebody, and this has happened to me. You get targeted, and I will call it gang stalking because this does go on. You get a group of basically terrorists who want to target you, and they all start giving information to the police about you. Then you get the police phoning up, and the police are rather confused, but they have to phone you up. So immediately, this did happen to me once, and I made a counterclaim against the people. I said, well, those two in front of you are criminals. They've accused my friend of fraud. They're under the Malicious Communications Act. They've sent text messages, etc. Goes on and on and on. And criminal offences. It goes into criminal damage. And this is incredible. So the police won't actually get involved with serious crimes, but they will get involved with hearsay and nonsense. And that's what this is. So if you want to report a hate crime, I mean, the people who are reporting this sort of stuff are often very much into identity politics, to the point where they're offended about everything. In fact, they're offended most of the time. I mean, I can say I'm offended most of the time because most things I see do offend me, but that's my opinion. I've got no right to go and say to the police, well, I'm offended, so you've got to do something about it. And of course, that's what we're going into. But all it's about is controlling. It's controlling the narrative of public opinion, so that the public are frightened to speak out. And that never really works. Dictatorships like that never actually really work. What they get is seething resentment underneath, which is why they have to have all their useful idiots in place. But that's just something that was sent to me a couple of weeks ago. And with the mining of data, and especially with local councils, I want to get onto that next, actually. I think this is flowing quite nicely now, because I've been sent this by one of our good citizen spies over in Waltham Forest. And it's quite interesting. I want to share this because it's absolutely incredible. You've got Waltham Forest who are now partnered with these developers, and they've now named themselves the Borough of Culture. They've won an award. How many awards have they won in the past few years? Many. They've had awards for cycling. They've had awards for setting up community hubs. They've had awards from TfL to close all the roads off and make everybody cycle from 8 to 80. But let's bearing in mind they have corporate partners, and bearing in mind what's happening in Haringey with the development vehicle, Haringey development vehicle, and also in Southwark, and also bearing in mind that on their Twitter feed, Waltham Forest Council said, "We welcome Hadley Properties to our Borough of Culture special event with artist blah 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 on this date at William Morris House." And so they're openly flaunting that they are inviting these property developers who are their business partners to these public events. Now, on the face of it, you could say, well, why not? But it's very unprofessional, to say the least, but it leads into what I'm going to say. This is from the East London and West Essex Guardian on the 11th of March this year. Headline: Waltham Forest Council report reveals internal fraud investigations. A council investigated 13 cases of fraud involving its own staff or partners between April 2017 and January 2018. Isn't that a coincidence that that's when a lot of this regeneration and new developments and hive housing was being built? A Waltham Forest Council report has revealed the authority internally declared and dealt with 13 incidents of fraud. Cases included theft, abuse of position and contractor fraud. The majority of cases involved council employees. Investigations resulted in 4 council employees or associates being dismissed or resigning. Well, wait a minute. That's a bit vague, isn't it? Dismissed or resigning. So in other words, they were just told to resign, or they were tipped off and resigned. It doesn't say how yet. It says 4. So it says dismissed or resigned. It doesn't say how many resigned and how many were dismissed. Very vague. In one case, an individual was found guilty of fraud, but no action was taken. Oh, what a surprise. Another case was dropped after fraud could not be proved. Investigators took into account the Council's Code of Conduct, financial procedures and procurement rules when reviewing cases. Councillor Liqua Ali, Cabinet Member for Transformation and Commercial Services, said, Waltham Forest Council is committed to the highest standards of conduct. We take allegations of fraud extremely seriously, and we will take robust action against any members of staff who do not maintain the high ethical standards we expect. As a result of the 13 internal investigations, 4 members of staff have been dismissed or chose to resign, and 6 were subject to recommendations following the investigations. So there you go. I mean, the sound bites that these people come out with is sickening. They haven't got their own minds. They're incapable of actually saying anything which sounds honest or even sounds as though it's been said spontaneously. Of course, these things are written up and they just read out as press releases. Now, here we go. Here's another one. Waltham Forest Council has breached data protection laws. Hang on. Here we go. Open up that one. And this, again, is from The Guardian, the Essex Guardian. Waltham Forest Council has breached the protection laws. We were just talking about the implications of it with the Amazon Echo. Waltham Forest Council employee uploaded a video containing sensitive information to YouTube. A report filled with damning personal data breaches has revealed. The report by private consultants, Agilis, noted the council is currently not compliant with data protection regulations. It also shows how personal information was wrongly disclosed 18 times and emails were sent to the wrong person 5 times. Meanwhile, laptops were lost or stolen 10 times. In total, 39 council employees and partners were investigated in 2017 for failing to protect important information. The number of investigations was up 50% since 2016. The council has until May the 25th to ensure it is compliant with data protection laws. If it does not, it could be taken to court. Waltham Forest Council continues to work with consultants to address its data protection practices. Issues highlighted included a lack of training and the need for more consistent handling of queries. A maximum fine under the new regulations could be up to £500,000 for serious data breaches by a local authority. Now, wait a minute. That £500,000, where's that going to come from? Oh, I know. It's going to come from council tax, isn't it? Of course. Councillor Liqua Ali, Cabinet Member for Transformation and Commercial Services, said the new General Data Protection Regulations come into effect on Friday 25th of May, and Waltham Forest Council has been proactive in preparing for the new guidelines. The report outlines for members what work has been done to prepare for General Data Protection Regulations and reassure blah, 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 blah. Same as the last stupid quote from him or her, whoever they are. Yeah, it's pretty shocking stuff, but What's interesting is that I've approached Waltham Forest for information, and they've always used the Data Protection Act against me, the Data Protection Act that they don't comply with themselves. And I've won a court case against them. I've also had them trying to spy on me, and this was years ago. So now the Stasi is in place, the citizen spies are out there, and Waltham Forest has been twinned with North Korea. I think that's quite a good summation of where we are with all that, but it's quite incredible the amount of corruption that is visible there, and that's just scratching the surface. I think if you actually looked into it in any serious way, you would find a lot more, because the actual organisation within that council has always been appalling and very remote. Their building looks like Ceausescu's palace, you know, if you look at it. And in fact, ironically, a film company wanted to use it for a Nazi rally in Berlin. So they found that it was so much like East Berlin in the 1930s that they wanted to put swastikas on it, but the council didn't want that. I think the irony would not be lost on people now. So moving on to the UN, the enablers of human rights, the UN, the United Nations. Let's go into the bigger picture before we get Piers on, of where this actually really came from, because what I've said this before, and I've gone into this slightly, that I couldn't understand how the Agenda 21 principles, or this sustainable development model, which is based on fraudulent climate data, basically, got a hold so quickly. And it's been explained by this General Petrov, who was assassinated and in 2009. So actually, it might be good to play that other clip, Tony, before we go to this, that other habitat clip. It'll just maybe refresh people into what we're actually talking about.
My name is Diana McCann. I work at the University of Manchester and the International Institute for Environment and Development. The title of my lecture is Co-Producing Inclusive Cities to ensure that no one is left behind.
My name is Philip Brode. I'm the Executive Director of LSE Cities, a research centre at the London School of Economics dedicated to the analysis of global urban change and urbanization. I will speak about cities and the new climate economy, and specifically the role of urban form and transport.
My name is Michela Kuta. I'm Professor of Urban Theory at University College London, where I direct the City Leadership Laboratory. And today I want to talk to you about the idea of city networking and city leadership.
My name is Sean McLeod. I'm the World Bank's Global Lead for Territorial and Spatial Development. I'm going to tell you in the next 15 minutes the research we've been doing over the last 3 years looking at the spatial development of African cities. The title of my presentation is Africa Cities Opening Doors to the World.
My name is Thomas Coggan. I'm an SJD candidate and a fellow at the Urban Law Centre at Fordham University. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the role of urban law in the new urban agenda.
So my name is Carolyn Weitzman. I'm a professor of urban planning at the University of Melbourne, and I'm going to be talking about collaborative partnerships for affordable housing.
My name is Louis Dexter. I'm the Deputy Head of the Economic Analysis Unit in the DG for Regional and Urban Policy in the European Commission. And I want to tell you a story about Broadville and Narrowtown, because that tells you why we need a global, people-based definition of cities and settlements.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. The background music they put in is pretty hideous. It's like torture listening to it, really, through the headphones. But what they're saying is, again, what we need to get our heads around, that this is a global action plan implemented locally, and it's done through a corporate governance structure. And what these people are saying and doing within their organisations, which include the World Bank, the EU, the London School of Economics, the University of Buenos Aires, the University of Melbourne, Fordham University, University of Manchester, and University College London, is promoting all this soundbite stuff, which is what we're seeing everywhere. And the thing is that's quite disturbing about this is the way these people talk about it. I've just listened to one guy. I'm not even going to bore you with it, because he was going on about this stuff and this sustainability and the urbanization, and basically the problems that we're having with population, and that in in actual fact, the progress was actually causing the climate change and the problems. So they're building in problems that have to be solved at every level. And it was the most paint-dryingly boring load of nonsense. But what he was saying was actually horrific. And he sat there with glazed eyes, and he clearly can't be bothered doing it. He's reading it off the screen. And these people are actually part of this bureaucracy that is having this impact on people's lives. These people don't seem to have any conscience. They're just academics. They're probably getting paid huge amounts of money to be on these lobbying boards for the UN. And I don't think they've even got a clue what it is that they're doing. So let's get to the background of all this. General Petrov. Now, we talk about world governance and where it came from and how this UN agenda took hold and what it's really about, because it's a corporate agenda. And how could it be a corporate agenda? What happened? Let's get his take on this. And it's extremely important because this is how it all came about. And it needs to be expanded upon. This is from a Russian video on YouTube, which is obviously in Russian, and it's subtitled, which I've written the whole thing out because it's so important. Obviously I'm going to interject with some of my own summations of what was said because it's quite a long video. But he states the type referred to by politicians is world government. It is a mafia like the priesthood in ancient Egypt that controls processes on planet Earth. They migrated and now their address is in Switzerland. So basically, the European handover was so that Hitler could attack the USSR. This is his theory. Okay. Now, he also makes the point of why didn't Hitler rob the Swiss banks, which is a very good point, and why Switzerland never been invaded. Obviously, yes, it's a neutral country, but as that fella Sean Ross says, the Swiss don't have an army. The Swiss are an army, which is quite an interesting thing. But obviously they protect their borders. Most Swiss are very nice people. I've met quite a lot of them. And their country is extremely clean and extremely rich and will never be invaded. So it's probably quite a good place for the global elite to congregate. And you have to look at how Switzerland was formed. It was originally kind of 3 separate jurisdictions that joined into one. That's an interesting story within itself. But he said that there's a conference in Johannesburg in August 2002 when the leaders of all the countries on the planet gathered together to decide what should be done. They discussed how all the people can live together on the planet. The first such conference was in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. So this Johannesburg conference he's talking about is when a lot of this stuff got put into action. So if you look at the Rio Earth Summit of 1992, Russia was represented by Mikhail Kazanov at that was at the Johannesburg meeting. Sorry, this is rather garbled because it's just paraphrased. Now, the thing is that the Rio Earth Summit of 1992 put into action the global action plan implemented at a local level known as Agenda 21, the 40-chapter document on the UN website. And Maurice Strong got onto the stage and said that the current lifestyles of the affluent middle classes were unsustainable. Now, unsustainable meant everything from private property to meat eating. And it goes on and on and on. And even things like golf courses and wells, which we've been talking about tonight. And dams were going to be unsustainable. And it goes on and on and on. And then they started putting this stuff into through executive order, and it came into your council through the climate action plans of 2002. Now, we have talked about this. Well, you need a bit of background on that as to how it actually came about, because the UN, in their own words, actually state that this is not an environmental program. But as you heard, they bang on about climate change. That is one of their central core pillars of the whole thing. So after they gathered and discussed ecology, these global elite decided that the situation had got worse since 1992. Surprise, surprise. Well, it had to, didn't it? Because nobody was taking any notice of Agenda 21 or implementing it. So, that was before the Kyoto Protocols, all the rest of it. And so basically, we've got it. He states that it was announced in an elite magazine called Expert 37, which obviously is not for the public. And it was announced that 15% of the world's population living in Europe and North Africa That's 15% of the world's population live in Europe and North America, and these 15% consume 75% of all the resources on the planet. The remaining 85% consume the 25% which is left over. What is most important is that a third power is mentioned. This third power presented an ultimatum for the entire human race. Now, when he's talking about this third power, we're not talking about a big conspiracy here. We're talking about the people that these people that we've just listened to are talking about, i.e. the World Bank, the EU, etc., and all of these universities and lobbying bodies that have been set up in every country around the world. Put in sustainable development and in your area, and you will get loads of stuff coming up. And we were covering what was said on this German website. Germany's very advanced on this, and the sustainable development plans and the people who are in place to impose it there are absolutely change agents and not really qualified to even do the job, which is a very important thing, because they're putting these useful idiots up front who are sort of easily led intellectuals, really, who can't really put things together. Because if they could put it together, they might get the bigger picture, and of course that's not necessary, because they are parts of the compartmentalized overall plan. So it says, if the well-to-do people in rich countries worry about the preservation of clean water and clean air, then the people in poor countries, to whom we also belong, worry about how they can feed themselves. So a conflict arose here. So the third power, or the owners of the transnational banks and corporations, presented an ultimatum in which they said that they would solve all these problems if they were given control over all the infrastructure that ensures the well-being of people. Now, we've covered that before, that quote, but we're going to go further with it tonight. This is related, first of all, to the energy and what we've been talking about tonight. Very, very important. The resources, not just human resources, but water and all precious minerals. Water, very important. We have no shortage of water on this planet, and we've got desalination tanks. There's no reason for a water shortage, and a lot of these droughts that are being created are artificial, in my opinion, especially the one in California. And well, they've had several, but California is Agenda 21, Global Action Plan, corporate governance central. It's absolutely dreadful, and so is London. London is really, as we keep talking about, changed radically over the last year. So it carries on. This is the proof of what many politicians talk about. The global mafia are the owners of transnational banks and corporations. These 350 clans of families are the owners of about 50% of the world's wealth. Now, this is why you've got people like Branson and Bill Gates really into this environmental program. And Bill Gates obviously wanting to reduce the population with vaccinations, as he stated in his own TED talk. And these people are part of that elite. So Branson is part of this. And whatever his motives are kind of unimportant. But he is definitely part of it. So if you look at what he says, you can decode it that he's part of this clan. Some of the well-known names include Rothschild, Morgan, Oppenheimer, Lieb, Kuhn, and Abraham. They are the owners of these banks, including the ones in Switzerland. These 6,000 people own as much wealth as 6 billion people or all the other people on the planet. Knowing this, there shouldn't be any talk about common values, humanitarian ideals, and all the other things that are used to fool us. So we continue to live in a global involuntary civilization, but problems arose for these globalists, and they arose a long time ago. These problems became the foundation for the First and Second World Wars and of the emergence of Hitler. Now, this is his take on it from a Russian perspective. It's now admitted that there are global problems. One problem is that there are now too many people on the planet. They think, the global elite think, that the Earth can sustain 2 to 3 billion people maximum. This is the theory of the so-called global billion, which they want to get it down to, but they're quite happy with 2 to 3 billion to be going on with. 1 billion people can live well, and the other 5 billion are expendable. They can die of hunger, disease, or addiction. Now we can see how that's been played out quite easily. Another problem is that the Earth is round. Well, please, if any of our listeners are in flat Earth, don't get into that, right? And it has been thoroughly explored. Right, yes. Now, they say this is a theory that the Earth has been thoroughly explored. Well, it hasn't. It hasn't been fully explored. There's many places we've never been. Everything on the earth should be taken under control. Now, this is the naivety of these people. They assume that because we've kind of mapped the world, that we've been everywhere in it. And of course we haven't. Most of it is ocean, and most of that is unexplored. And so in inaccessible places. We've got to remember that we're not actually even adapted to our own environment. There's places we can't go. The giant panda was only found, I think, in the 1800s. And how could you miss that against a background of bamboo? You know, a big, huge, fluffy, black and white bear on a green background. Very difficult to miss that. So and those things can't even breed. That's why they're going extinct, because they actually can't. They can't even breed. They don't even really know what to do. So that's just an example of something that's got, you know. So there's species and things out there, and there's areas of jungle that we haven't been. We're never going to go there either. We're just not equipped to go there. And in mountain regions. And this is the theory that there was a retreat with the Almas and the Yetis and all these things. It was we have done several shows on that with Lloyd Pye. That's a side issue, but take a look at that, because in a way that does tie into this and the ignorance of these people. Anyway, he says, I mentioned that Russia has everything, but countries in Europe like France and Germany don't have gas, oil, silver, gold, aluminium, timber, etc. But these Europeans still live considerably better than Russians and young people in Russia. Look to those countries as an example to be followed. But why is it like this? It's because we are simply being robbed, and most people don't even realise this. Now, many scientists are even saying that in 15 to 20 years there will be wars over water. Again, what we're talking about at the beginning of the show. This is going to be incredibly important, because this is a weapon of war. Water can be used as a weapon. In other words, water shortages are actually the best form of warfare. Same with food. Best form of warfare is to starve the population and dehydrate them. You probably heard Yuri Lushkov, he says, say that Siberian rivers should be diverted to the south so that we can sell the fresh water. Now, this is an important point. I was in Nepal about 18 months ago, and they have rivers everywhere in that country. But when you drive through Nepal on the main highway, you will see that the beds of huge rivers are completely dried out. And what they've done is they've redirected the rivers, and the water in Nepal goes to India, and they have hydroelectric power, which gets pumped into India, and India then regulates the Nepali electricity, which is why they get up to 86 hours of power cuts a week. And nobody knows when the power's coming on again. It's irregular, it's very disturbing, and it's disruptive. It means that the country can't really expand, it can't really grow. The businesses have to have generators, but generally the poor people there, which is the majority, are impoverished. And Nepal now, I think, is run by the Communist Party. So when people talk about communism, there's kind of different versions of it, and our version is slightly different than theirs, but they're broadly under the same thumb. So he says another problem is ecological. When I was a boy, I could drink tap water without problems, but now people don't do this, and water has become a commodity. Water is sold in bottles now. Now, isn't that interesting, Tony? What an interesting point to make.
Well, it is interesting, yeah, because you was just mentioning California and their water shortages, and most of it was sold to Nestle, who then resell it to the Californians for a really nice profit. Lovely.
Well, that's right, and the chairman of Nestle says that water is not a human right. How can the head of a corporation say that? How can anybody say that water is not a human right?
And remain the head of the corporation.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, mainly because it's good business. I mean, well, people need water. Let's make it scarce. Let's make it a scarce commodity.
Yes.
You know,
fracking.
Artificial. Yes, absolutely.
I said about that a long time ago, fracking, right? It's more about water than anything else. When you look into the finances of fracking, it doesn't make any sense. And the amount of actual pure water left on our planet, I believe, is something well under 1% of the total amount of pure natural water, which is a pretty shocking amount, but that should be researched by people, as should everything that we always say, because it's quite a while ago I heard that. And when you was talking about the exploration of the land, etc., we've explored around about 5% of the sea, and just a week or two ago, and again I don't know, I can't remember exactly where it was, I think it was New Zealand, a creature unlike any seen before, a very big one as well, was washed up on a shore, and that's not the first one in recent times. All this weather upset that's causing the oceans to spew up all sorts of things that we've not seen before. So anyone that thinks that we know all what's on this planet is living in cloud cuckoo land. We've got no idea really of what's around us.
Absolutely not. That's very, very true. Yes, I'm aware of those creatures, and if you actually search and do some research, you can find loads of examples of that. Totally anomalous, strange creatures everywhere. Yeah. But however, let's carry on with this. We're not breaking a minute and bring in Piers. So he said, since the global mafia live in Switzerland, for example, they worry about the ecology. If a nuclear accident occurs, like a Chernobyl, then Europe can be affected. The ecological problem is complicated, so the globalists decided to reconstruct national ownership in such a way that they can live in ecologically clean regions. The dirty industries are therefore transferred to regions where they don't live. Through the prism of these problems, one should look at what's happening in the motherland, which is Russia. So that's really interesting. Now, a while ago, I just wrote a kind of antidote to this and what it's really about. In other words, the state assumes that you are corruptible. And this is very true with most of these organisations, actually. They assume that you're corruptible, and that is the only real weapon. They find it hard to argue with truth and fact. The state compensates for the criminal mind. That's really what it does, and basically adapts to it. Those who are forming world government will take away all redress and create legislation which removes inalienable rights, which is exactly what's happening. They'll create agitation groups causing dissent. This will lead to quicker centralisation of power, which is exactly what's going on. I mean, the gun argument in America being perpetuated by these change agents and 25-year-old kids in front of green screens who weren't even there is absolutely ridiculous, and we've covered that. And this David Hogg, I mean, it's so blatantly obvious that these people are just puppets and propagandists, and they're trying to disarm Americans. And of course we know why that is. That they will create agitation groups causing dissent. This will lead to quicker centralisation of power, definitely. The promotion of so-called liberalism is counterintelligence operation born out of political correctness as a cover for divide and rule, which is exactly what it is. We've got neo-Bolshevism in this country now. That's really what it is. And that when you see what these councils are putting out, it's total communism. So the aim is to create a fake reality bound by political correctness, constructing a virus of the mind. It's like a mind virus that these people have. They are unable to see what's going on around them. They are completely switched off, and you cannot actually reason with them because there's nothing to reason with. They are unreasonable. And we must remember that in what the social engineers call the post-truth world, that if things can be proven, they cannot be denied. And that is really the most important point for this part of the show. We're going to bring Piers in. We're going to talk about bigger picture of what's going on in part two, as usual, the bigger picture. If things can be proven, then they cannot be denied. And that brings us into an email, which I want to finish off with, to Clyde, when I sent my video, which is one of our shows, called London's Dystopia, Public Winning Fight Back, which featured a lot of very well-informed people. It wasn't just me spouting my crazy conspiracy opinions, which is what this man thought. So the councillor and cabinet member for the environment, Clyde Lokes, who implements this stuff as a change agent in Waltham Forest, when I sent him the video, which featured Gordon Peters, who took down the Haringey development vehicle, and Peter O'Kane, housing officer in Hackney, who both spoke at this thing along with many others, he said, "Hello, Mark. Thank you for your email and for taking the time to contact me. However, as I don't subscribe to the hugely discredited and laughable conspiracy theories that suggest there is an Agenda 21 takeover of the world, I'm afraid I find it of no value whatsoever." Now, that was a massive own goal for him, which I really don't want him to forget. So I sent him this back. Councillor Lokes, you clearly wish to ignore the public meeting held last week at the Epicentre in Leytonstone, whose speakers are featured in the show. Your patronising and uninformed response clearly shows you have not listened to or considered the information presented on behalf of the constituents in your borough. Which part of the factual information in the show is a conspiracy theory? The people featured in the show are council officials, including those who have stopped the corporate takeover in Haringey, and by dismissing the content, you are openly acting against the public interest. The truth about Claire Kober is conveniently a conspiracy theory for those with their noses in the corporate trough. The facts about her resignation are clearly presented in this show by those who stopped the HDV, including Gordon Peters. So this woman, this CEO who resigned because she'd signed off on the Haringey development vehicle, said it was because she was being bullied and harassed. Of course, what people do in these positions is they always become the victim. And that's what she tried to do. And this guy roundly debunked it and told us exactly why she resigned. Carrying on, the show is actually about what is happening in the borough, of which you are a big part and getting paid very well for it. I have this conspiracy theory nonsense from lobbyists in Waltham Forest. They now know that this is the policy of local authorities and a national and global issue. The fact that the PR-led and journalist-free media do not report it cannot undermine the factual and well-referenced information. As you must be aware, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 is a global action plan implemented at a local level. You yourself stated this is not just happening in this country, but all over Europe and America, so you know that it's part of a bigger picture. Now that's really important. So in other words, he knows it's not just Waltham Forest. This is a template that's going on all over the world, so he knows it's a global action plan. So I said, are you saying that the 40 chapters of Agenda 21 are a conspiracy theory? I challenge you to find any deficiency in the information I've presented. I also challenge you to a public debate in front of the public in your borough who you state that you represent. Your patronising response is an insult to the quality of information contained in the show. Signed, me. Now, of course, there was a deadly and continued silence after that. No response whatsoever when I asked him for a public debate. And, of course, that's how they operate. So we're going to have a break now, and we're going to bring back Mr. Corbyn in part 2.
Rightio. This is Psy Ambience and Caught in a Buddhist Trance.
Okay, welcome back to Windows on the World. We've been joined by Piers Corbyn. First of all, we're going to have a look at what was in the chat box. Have you got any questions there, Tony?
Well, we've got quite a few comments. The chat box has been really busy. Thanks everyone for that, as usual. Eric says, my local council have just published a local plan. It looks like something out of a communist 5-year plan. He goes on to say thousands of rabbit hutch houses here, there and everywhere, 20-mile-an-hour high roads to destroy local businesses and a large cinema complex in his town. Mithrin says, these Tetra radio sets that our emergency services wear, we all know how dodgy they are, but I've just realised that the US cops don't use them. Why would that be, anyone? So that was in relation, obviously, to stuff you was talking about at the beginning of the first hour with these frequencies, 5G and radio waves and that. And, remind me after the show, because if you want to do one on that, I've got the perfect man for that, Mark.
That's great, Tony. We should cover that because we can put it into the bigger perspective, hopefully, yeah.
Eric says a lot of conspiracies originate from government offices. Flat Earth is a typical example. Yeah, agree. What we got here? The BBC ran an advert asking people to report anyone they suspect abusing their children. And Babs says...
Yeah, that's on LBC as well.
Right, yeah, okay, it does say LBC, sorry, not BBC.
Right.
And then Babs saying that she thinks there's one about people grassing up the disabled or people they think might not be disabled. And Eric thinks we should have a local authority bovine excrement excellence award. I think that came up once before and it's a good idea. We should probably do that. I think there will be a lot of contenders. It will be not an easy one to judge. Have you noticed almost everything from the government is covered in threats? I got my car tax through. It warned me I could lose my car if I do not pay their protection racket. Sorry, I mean tax. Personally, I would like to tell the government where they can shove their tax. I'm sure you would, Eric, but it probably wouldn't end up well for you. Is this the coldest global warming the Earth has ever seen? That's one for Piers, I suppose, in a bit. Hopefully we're doing a show.
Well, there's been record cold levels all over Europe and record snow levels, or the snowiest for 130 years in a lot of places. Yet the global warmers are now going berserk and saying that this super cold is caused by global warming. Yeah. Now, this is a demented claim. But it's recently been spouted by a professor at the Imperial College Grantham Institute, where Professor Seigert spelt that out in the Daily Express. And we've issued a news release, and we're sending him a letter to say you should justify this in a scientific way with evidence, and if you don't, we'll take the matter to Imperial College authorities and ask them if they've given up on academic excellence and have become a religious institution. We ask very specific questions. He says, one, he says, this is the sort of extreme we'd expect. And I said, well, question one is, where in advance, a long time in advance of these extremes, has it been said by anybody in a reputable place with a scientific argument that cold will be a result of the so-called warming? And the second thing is, how can you claim this when in actual fact CO2 levels in the real data are a consequence of temperature levels, not the other way around? They're an effect, not a cause. And the third thing to ask him is, of course, well, since man only produces 4% of the CO2 that goes in and out of the biosphere, how can man control the other 96% if CO2 is important at all? So, just these three questions. He has to give explanations for all of them, and if he doesn't, we'll write off to Imperial College and raise the game on this matter, because it is really becoming completely useless. We're seeing the last-ditch attempt of the warmists, and as Mark said earlier, they're completely connected with the ideology of globalization and world corporate diktat of the population. And the population subservience and super exploitation?
Indeed they are. They're great questions.
That we go for them on this, because at least there's somebody to go for, someone who's actually said something instead of hiding behind nonsense. Well, it is nonsense, but they've actually stuck their heads above the parapet. And for them to do it in Imperial College is very unwise, because that is, a leading institution. But you see, the Grantham Institute there is really, it's actually a pro-oil setup. And Mr. Grantham himself invests money in oil, because, of course, the ideology of climate change enables a maintenance of oil price. I mean, there's big problems with maintaining oil price now because of fracking, but, that was why they went for it in 2004.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because it's all about making these people liable, because one thing that I think came from the first part of the show is that these people are remote. No one's heard of these people who are working for the UN at these habitat conferences, who are making these decisions. They're making these decisions on our behalf, and they are completely misinformed. So how do you get through to people? You don't know who these people really are or where they are. That a lot of them are academics. I suppose you can find them, but the general public wouldn't have a clue who they were, and the general public haven't got a clue what habitat is or the urbanization agenda. So it's very, very remote. It's about remote authority, and that's what these councils are doing. They're becoming more and more remote, but with the front of becoming more and more engaged. So in actual fact, when you want to get hold of anyone at the council, you can't do that now, but you can follow them on Twitter, and they can tell you about what's going on and how wonderful the borough is, and how all of the comrades are helping each other out and planting, basically planting little flowers in these tubs everywhere and tidying up, which is actually the job of the council.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
anything else, Tony?
Well, just get back to the global warming climate change thing. I think we did say last week that we might be doing one next week if we could get it together about the coming mini ice age and possible glacial periods. I don't know how well we're getting on with that, but we might be able to.
Stuff on that,
hopefully
certainly.
we can do that in there, because I've been seeing a lot of interesting stuff on that lately. It'll be a nice one to get out, I think. Eric says, here in the UK southeast there is a water shortage, and they are building massive housing estates here. And Martin says, yes, it's absolute insanity, building yet more houses now that the UK only grows about half the food the population needs, which is pretty alarming. Yes, and Eric adds, it's all to do with the, let me see if I can pronounce this,
Coldenhove-Kalergi plan.
Well, thank you, Mark. I knew you'd rescue me. So that's it. I've got more in the chat, but I've got to get them over for the end of the show if we have time.
Well, Richard Coldenhove-Kalergi was around before the European Union was set up, but he largely predicted what was going to happen in the respect that they were talking about the mongrelization of Europe. In other words, that there wouldn't really be a single country, a single culture left. It was going to become a monoculture of people who were basically between white and black. In other words, there was sort of inbred with every other race, and there wouldn't be any races left. That's the idea of the Coldenhove-Kalergi plan. But there's more to it in the respect that they wanted to destroy what Europe actually is, because it's a very productive continent and the people could work very well together. Of course, they don't really want that, and people will be very confused as to why that is. We haven't got time to go into that, but I think I've gone into the background of it on today's show. But that Coldenhove-Kalergi plan is really a big part of what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that this, what you call the globalist ideology, is all connected, you see. As you said many times, Mark. I mean, Agenda 21, globalization, open borders, deindustrialization of the West, enslavement of the rest of the world, climate change ideology, believe in the European Union, the United Nations, and social cleansing in the name of supposedly providing housing, when actually it's the opposite. I mean, all these things hang together, and what we're seeing in London is a atomized, weak workforce of extra immigrant labour brought in, who are not organised and can be very easily exploited, and they're mobile, so they can move around indeed to try and get better places, but they are super exploited. I mean, the last thing the new corporate ventures want is organised labour, where the workers demand rights, fair wages, and can go on strike to bring things to a halt. But if they have atomised labour of people coming and going, then of course it's very difficult. And I think that is what they want to impose. And if you start disagreeing with anything, like you don't like Brexit, you're called a racist, or you come up with anything, you're called a conspiracy theorist. Or I think whenever anyone accuses anybody of a conspiracy, you should say, well, what do you mean? But you know, in fact, what we have is a corporatist agenda for super profits and actually social cleansing in the case of the cities. Now, some people characterise what they're doing as communist and others as fascist or whatever, but I think that putting labels like that don't necessarily help. I mean, I would say it's globalist super exploitation, because if you want to look at what communism was supposed to be about, it would have been providing reasonable housing, and in fact the Parker Morris standards of housing, council housing in London after the war were tremendous, excellent, spacious stuff, such as the Aylesbury estate or the Alton estate in Wandsworth and so forth. So if that was communist, then it was good. But the word communist now is used to mean everybody shoved into egg boxes. Well, okay, but I mean, I would just say try and avoid those things. And what we're really about, it's about globalist, corporate, regimentation and super exploitation versus democracy and accountability. I mean, I think those are the key issues ahead of us.
Yes, we broadly talked about that in the first part of the show, what it actually is. And of course, these terms like communism, fascism, whatever, they've all been stripped of their meaning anyway.
Yes.
They don't have any meaning anymore. They have a meaning in the minds of the people who actually use them.
Yes.
So when I say communism, I mean, it was really communitarianism that came out of Cameron when he's talked about the big society. Nobody will be left out. Again, like the UN, in those audios we played earlier, saying no one will be left behind. They're all parroting the same thing. It's a corporate imposed structure which is done with global governance but implemented at a local level, and it's unstructured governance. And the background to it we've just gone into with that General Petrov statement, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. And he was actually allegedly murdered in 2009, but he put a huge part of a jigsaw together in that I couldn't understand how this thing had gone so quickly. And when he said, well, the World Bank and all, we knew these people were involved, but when he said they all got together, and that was what Rio was about, and that was what Johannesburg 2002 put into force, it makes absolute sense, because this stuff took a long time to get going. It didn't really happen in the 90s at all. In fact, it's only really happened in the past 5 years to the speed that we're seeing it now, with the London becoming completely unrecognisable, villages being depopulated. The agenda is open, it's there in your face, and the public are now seeing it. So that's quite interesting as to where this is going to go. I mean, you've been a council tenant for a long time, haven't you, Piers? And you've been on the Aylesbury estate. So
that's right.
You must have seen this coming in the last couple of years and been quite shocked, I would think.
I have. The rate at which this ideology and suppression has been implemented is astounding. And the number of councillors who just believe what the officers tell them is astounding. I think in most councils, or probably in all councils, we've got effectively a deep state which basically tells councillors what to think. I was on for a short time and experienced this, and then of course councillors move on, so they tell the next ones along what to think, and by the time they realise that they're being manipulated, they go. But there's a split now in Southwark to an extent. Some councillors have rebelled against the plan being imposed on the Elephant and Castle, and the students are also getting upset and don't want their university the printing college, what was the printing college, to be conniving in social cleansing. So, we're campaigning against anyone going to the University of the Arts because that is the social cleansing university. But I wanted to say some things about more internationally about the speed at which this crazy corporate agenda is being imposed. We have in Greece now, in the name of the European Union Central Bank, people basically being starved and they're having their houses confiscated because they owe more than £400. Well, this is not a way to rebuild an economy that's got into trouble. I mean, you have to invest in infrastructure and so forth to do that, but they're doing the complete opposite. It's just bleeding the place to death. And in Brazil, you have these huge investment operations run by the central bank, the International Monetary Fund, or the World Central Bank, if you like. They want to basically destroy the Amazon basin and all the tribes therein and build dams across it to provide hydroelectricity to save the planet. Well, in this so-called saving the planet, they're actually destroying, a fantastic natural habitat. And in their own terms, people involved have pointed out that the methane produced by these new ponds they're making, lakes, will be far in excess of the so-called carbon dioxide they believe they are reducing, by having electricity. So it's a complete lie in their own terms what they're doing, but nevertheless it's sold to the public in terms of saving the planet. So people have to understand that when they hear these things, it's about saving the planet or stopping climate change, and it must be somehow good. Actually, it's not good. It's not even part good. It is totally bad. All these things they're putting across in the name of good are totally bad. They're not partly good. I know people like to think it's partly good. Now, recycling is harmless. You can do it, but don't imagine you're saving the planet by doing it. That's just an exercise that you do to make you believe in why you're doing it, of course. But just don't get yourself drawn into things. Okay, yeah. I mean, that's
I think it's just that
essential stuff right now.
That's a really important thing, that all of this stuff is done with the idea that it's a benefit and it's good, and then the real agenda is the secondary issue, which is never disclosed, and everything is done like that. This stuff, particularly with Agenda 21 and the Regeneration, Urbanization projects, are exactly that. They're presented as environmental. In their own words, they're not environmental. These people are talking about CO2 and buildings giving out CO2 and getting into things that are totally distraction. But those distraction issues are used to actually implement the agenda. So we've got implementing the new urban agenda. This is from the unhabitat.org website, an urbanization action blueprint for UN Habitat and our partners in government, the UN, civil society, communities. When they talk about communities, I find that really interesting because they can never really define that. I think it's their community they're talking about. Because when they talk about vibrant communities, we talked about this.
Well, they're destroying them. The Highgate community was destroyed. The Aylesbury community, or Aylesbury State community, they're trying to destroy it. It's three-quarters still there. I mean, which they don't want to admit. But, everything they do is to destroy communities.
Yeah, it all has to support this agenda. It says the private sector, professionals, the scientific and academic community in support of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development, especially Sustainable Development Goal 11, making cities inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable.
Yeah, well, I don't know really what that means if you look at the detail. What do they mean by sustainable? I mean, I think we should have cities where everyone is paid fairly for what they do, and that includes all immigrant labour. They have to be given the full minimum wage so that they can't be used to undercut the existing population. Everyone has to have rights, but as it is, rights are taken away and one group is used against another in order to super exploit the whole population in the interests of the super rich, i.e. Wall Street, Branson and his cronies.
Absolutely. But if you want to know what the actual achieving the sustainable development is all about, the goals of this, how they're going to achieve it, it says ASUD, achieving sustainable development, is a pathway to urban development that can meet current needs without prejudicing those of the future. The ASUD approach has three main aims. One, to build cities that are livable. Well, how can you build cities that aren't livable? You know.
Well, yeah. And what they're actually doing, though, is in the case of tower blocks along the Thames, they're 3/4 empty, owned by international money launderers.
Yeah, well, they're still
the
livable,
public,
Piers.
well,
I mean, come on, people could live there, couldn't they?
Well, they could,
really
but
wanted to.
they won't, because they can't, because these guys have got a number of these flats and they can't live in 6 places at once.
Yeah,
so,
they haven't thought of that.
And the local population have been socially cleansed.
That's right.
By various steps, and they're driven out of London and go off to Sheffield or Manchester or whatever. And, you know, the film Daniel Blake, of course, spells it out pretty well.
Yeah, it goes on that they want to provide an environment for agglomeration economies. Agglomeration economies. Do you know what that means?
No, I don't know. But I know in some parts of America, people have got pissed off with social cleansing operations and money launderers popping in. And Vancouver passed a law against any investments for property speculation purposes. Now, this could be done in London, but it would, of course, completely upset the whole financial operation, which is basically pumping up rents up and up, keeping places empty, and those who are able to live in them paying more and more and more and more to banks and the super rich. And the people at the top of this tower of theft, i.e. the super rich in Wall Street, of course, are gaining and the rest of the world is losing. And somehow we have to stop all this, you know. People need to open their eyes to it and call a halt. And these coming council elections will do that. Now, of course, my brother is, you know, wants to stop this as much as, or more than anyone else, or as much as anyone else. But certain people in the Labour Party don't want to stop it and are hand in glove with globalisation. And we sort of had the recent case of Owen Smith, or Sergeant Bilko Smith, as I call him, who was on Jeremy's front bench until recently, when he suddenly announced he wanted to have another referendum on Brexit. Well, you know, hang on, we've had a vote on that, so Jeremy sacked him. But of course, the reason for him suddenly spouting on this is because of the elections are coming up, and these globalists, or Blairites, if you want to call them that, really don't want Labour to do well, because it's an embarrassment for them, and the consequence will be that their mission, along with the other globalists around the world and the United Nations and the European Union, will be severely dented, and they don't want that. So they are actually working against their own party.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. And again, the public are aware of this corporate front and what you're saying. It's what's behind it, which is the organisational structure. And that's where we're trying to take this apart. And I think we've done it quite well. I was talking to Sandy Adams today, and she did a great talk with us on Agenda 21.
Indeed.
And yeah, you were there, weren't you? We did a talk at that festival on the Sunday. It was packed. It was brilliant. And we're going to be doing that a lot more this year. But Sandy is rather concerned about this hub in her area, which just seems to be very shady about its finances and won't disclose its finances even to people who are shareholders. And they're going to have a meeting and bring all this up. But what's happening is these people, the sustainable development people, are all in these hubs all over the country. We report on this a lot. And all of the players are in their positions. This is what the public don't get, I think. It's that this is very highly organised. So the right kind of useful idiots are put in at every level. And if we take it to the level of London, well, just say Sadiq Khan. And that's all you need to know. And the way this has been organised is very scientific, and it's all about psychology. It's a psychological operation on the public. So in other words, what we're getting is cognitive dissonance. It throws cognitive dissonance at people because they are being told it's an environmental programme. Well, it's not. So what is it? Oh, it's about greed. Well, no, it's not really. It's meant to be about the opposite. It's meant to be about the distribution of wealth, but it's actually about greed. It totally doesn't make any sense unless you can see what it's about. And when we realise that it is global corporations that are running it, and the World Bank and the IMF, and these people aren't our friends, They go into countries to take the infrastructure over. That's their job. They are there to take control. That's what they do in poor countries. The UN don't go in as peacekeepers for no reason. They go in there to take over the infrastructure, to empower the women, to split up the family, to take control for the state. That's why they go in. And people who think that that is not what happens, who work for the UN, are probably right in their own compartmentalized way. In other words, they see a small part of it. But when you look at what the UN is, and we've gone over that in the first part of the show, they are basically a mercenary army that goes into different countries. And also, this global action plan, people just don't get that it's a UN program. And I think we've explained it quite well. I mean, is there any comment that you'd like to make, Piers, about what was said in the first half of the show? Is there anything there that you didn't know or had not come across?
Yes. Well, I think the general points you were making are very sound. And, you know, people are being fed a sort of nice sounding scheme of things, you know. The United Nations and European Union are sort of well-meaning things, and we ought to go along with them and do what they say. Now, actually, the truth is the opposite. You see, the United Nations was the source of the weapons of mass destruction lie, which led to the invasion of Iraq, and a whole lot more followed, with millions of people killed. It's the same United Nations which has come up with the man-made climate change story. And the reasons for it are the same. It's the most powerful in the world control the agenda of the United Nations. And it's a Wall Street operation. And people need to wake up to what the European Union is all about. Now, a lot of people like the idea of the European Union because it's got the word union in, and it's everybody holding hands, and it's happy clappy and so forth. But not the case at all, because in Greece people are dying and being starved by this. I mean, the European Union is actually a prison in which its members can be super exploited at the behest of international corporations such as Wall Street, while other operations are locked out. Now, the sooner Britain gets out of this, the better. Now, I can understand some people not being too sure about it, but I'm totally convinced that outest, quickest is bestest. And interestingly, a new survey now says that 57% of the population, which I suppose it's a fair survey, want the government to get on with Brexit as quickly as possible. Now, it was only 52% who voted for Brexit originally, so I think the antics of the European Union, and maybe people getting wise on what's happening in Greece, or people who've realised that the Italians are now very pissed off with the European Union, I mean, these messages are getting through, and Britain out of the EU will be better. But the way out is going to be covered with difficulties, and now we have these big arguments about fish, I've noticed. Now, it is true in 20 months' time, essentially Britain will be running its own fish. And the Spanish fleets will have to ask to come to Britain and pay. Now, that's what I understand is happening. But in the meantime, the European Union is making fishing even more difficult through the fishing regulations. What they had before, up till this point in time, was that if a vessel fished more than its rules were allowed, its quota, then it had to throw fish back. Now, that was causing a lot of dead fish to be chucked in the sea. But now they changed the rules to say, well, any fishing vessel that has will have a number of quotas of different types of fish on it. If it reaches its quota on any particular type of fish, it has to stop fishing. Now, that means it has to go back into port. Well, hang on. So they'll go out, they hit a shoal of herring, fish that quota of that, then they've got to go home and can't fish anything else. Now, it is, of course, madness, you see. Then they've got to stay away for a day and go out another day. Well, what the fishermen are saying should be the rule is that you have a number of fishing days you're allowed, and that is it. You can catch what you want in a day, and that's it. And you can keep it or not if you don't want it, but you know you will want it because it's going to be worth something. And then if the fishing days are causing too much of a reduction of fish stock, then of course you'll reduce the fishing days. But it's going to mean a much more efficient and fairer and sensible way of doing things. But the European Union, behind their desks in Brussels, are just imposing the most insane things. Perhaps they want to bankrupt the British fishing fleet until 21 months' time, i.e. December 2020, when finally we'll have control of the waters. So, well, or will we have control? What is in the small print? I don't know. The fishermen are not happy, but I would say that certain progress has been made, and the European Union are backing off a bit, which must be a good thing. But watch this space, and I think we should back the fishermen 100%.
Well, absolutely, and of course, this is what we hear all day long, the Brexit argument. I mean, in a way, it's becoming a distraction in the respect that I don't think they're going to let it happen, but they've made a mistake in the respect that I believe that the vote was fixed to a certain extent, and they didn't fix it enough. I think there was much more on the Leave side.
Well, the 57% vote shows that.
Yes, well, that's starting to. It's starting to. But as I said at the time, up and down the country, it's mostly 70% for Leave.
When you ask around,
when you get out of London, and most people are, but they are of the opinion that it's not a good idea. Most people outside London.
No, the European Union is not a good idea.
That's right. Absolutely.
I'd like to know why we're actually doing business with the European Union, seeing they've never had their accounts audited and they're a criminal organisation, and we are not entitled or allowed to, under the law, to do business with a criminal organisation. Why are we doing any business with them at all? I want to know the answer to that from someone at the top.
Well, that was covered in the first part of the show, because they, as this chap said, they're an elite global mafia, and mafia doesn't really obey the rules, they just enforce rules. So they don't have to obey them, but they enforce them on us. And also, of course, we've got to remember that this is draconian. I'm just going to read something out from the UN.org, and this is about the Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Now, they've got people, planet, prosperity, peace, partnership, etc. Let's see what it says about peace. This is very interesting.
Well, we're in favour of peace.
Well, let's see what they say about it.
You're against peace, Mr. Windows.
No, I'm going to...
You're a conspiracist against peace.
I'm not for or against anything at the moment. What I'm saying is this, that their definition of peace may not be ours. Let's see what they say about it. We are determined to foster peaceful, just and inclusive societies which are free from fear and violence. There can be no sustainable development without peace, and no peace without sustainable development. Now, what are they saying in that last sentence? Are they saying that they're going to introduce agitation and disruption if they don't get their way? Well, they appear to be saying.
We have Antifa doing that as we speak in America, don't we?
There can be no peace without sustainable development. So the global action plan by the global elite, the global mafia, will not allow peace until this is implemented. So that basically is a threat, and they're stating that unless they get their way, we won't have peace. What have you got to say about that, Tony?
Well, I think it's pretty shocking, and but the other bit of it there that I noticed was that they say without this fear, well, does that mean, as Eric was saying earlier, that the government's running everything, council's running everything with fear in all of their letters and all their demands? Does that mean the fear's going to go out of all of that sort of thing? We're not going to be threatened anymore when it comes to a few quid here and there. I don't know. But yeah,
isn't there an ideology in there? See, what they're really saying, if you ask them, they're going to say, oh yes, if you don't have sustainable development, then because we're wasting things through not recycling, then there's going to be more poverty and therefore friction and therefore not peace. I mean, that's how they'll justify it, but what it means in practice, I don't know. You see, it's just a soundbite to make people do things, isn't it?
Well, it is, but you have to look at what's underneath it. And of course, the so-called global elite do want to depopulate the planet.
Yeah.
I mean, that's openly stated. It's actually in documents, and it's not a conspiracy theory. And they're doing
And if it's not sustainable development, then
there will be no peace.
There will be peace, and sustainable means you've got to reduce the population. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. No justice, no peace.
Okay.
But this is quite incredible. This is the introduction, the declaration of this global elite. On behalf of the peoples we serve, we have adopted a historic decision on a comprehensive, far-reaching and people-centred set of universal and transformative goals and targets. We commit ourselves to working tirelessly. Again, they're not going to give up on it. For the full implementation of this agenda by 2030. Jesus. We recognise that eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty, is the greatest global challenge and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. We are committed to achieving sustainable development in its three dimensions: economic, social and environmental, in a balanced and integrated manner. We will also build upon the achievements of the Millennium Development Goals and seek to address their unfinished business. We resolve between now and 2030 to end poverty and hunger everywhere, to combat inequalities within and among countries, to build peaceful, just and inclusive societies. Now, what they mean by that is empowering minority groups as use for agitation amongst people. So, in other words, all this stuff about LBGT and every agenda under the sun and everything being implemented on people to completely confuse them is all part of this, because they have to have distraction principles, and the distraction principles are the most important thing, because most of this is done with misdirection. If you look at what these councils are doing, it's all misdirection. It's all happy clappy. We're all together. We're all out there. We're part of the state work programme. We're all volunteers. We're volunteering. Part of this thing is voluntary. So they want the public to volunteer for it. In other words, this impoverishes everybody.
No one will be left behind.
Absolutely right, Tony. Nobody will be left behind. That is the Sustainable Development Goals and UNESCO. No child will be left behind either. And we can see that now with what's been taught. We go into Common Core, the whole thing, and we've now got several generations of people who are utterly brainwashed. Fortunately, it hasn't worked on all of them. And the ones it has worked on are all in their positions now. They're all in your local council, or they're working against the public interest, or the public interest of the people who actually want to stand up and be individuals. We can't have any of that. But it says, as we embark on this great collective journey... Wait a minute. So as we all embark...
They're destroying communities to embark on a great collective journey.
It's a great collective journey.
It's nonsense, isn't it?
But we didn't actually sign up to this, did we? Nobody even told us that we were part of the collective journey, which I think they do require some kind of consent. But what they're doing is they're manufacturing consent. It's called consensus.
Yeah.
There's a consensus agreement on it.
Yeah, but it's not our consensus, it's a consensus from above. And what we have is communities being destroyed and replaced by confused people without communities around them where they can resist poverty, wage cuts or whatever in various ways. So we have a new so-called community being imposed, which is to enable super exploitation.
Yeah. Now listen to this. I think they've answered our question, Piers. The goals and targets are the result of over 2 years of intensive public consultation.
Really?
Really? When were we consulted about this? The 17 goals of sustainable development. Were you sent this by your local council?
Well, they send you around all sorts of questionnaires, tick box exercises. What those amount to, who knows? But of course, that's probably their consultation.
Yeah. It says...
what is your ethnic... what's your ethnicity? Every time you fill in the form, they ask you for your ethnicity. Well, okay, you can have it or not, but I mean, for what purpose is this?
Well, it's all about identity politics, isn't it? And of course, it's all about the empowerment of minority groups. So if you're a minority group, then you get empowered, but you become privileged over other people. That's what it actually is. They're creating privilege, and they're creating people who assume privilege, and they want it. And they will not actually go and and join in with everybody else, they'll say, no, I'm empowered. And we've suffered from this. We've had our charity taken over by people who think that it should be theirs with no entitlement whatsoever, apart from the fact that they're rich, middle class, and into this new form of communitarianism, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, they call everybody else a fascist and a Nazi. They're very
confiscation from the real community, in fact.
Well, that's what it is. It's confiscation of assets, confiscation of ideas, and the shutting down of individuality and freedom. And they're doing it on behalf of these globalists. And they don't seem to see the irony there, that what they're actually doing is they're working for this world government agenda, which is just corporate. And as we've stated, it's a global mafia. Global mafia implemented at a local level. Well, at least with a mafia, you can pay them off. And you pay protection money. Now, people in Soho used to have to pay protection money if they had a club, but that's, in a way, that's much less threatening than what these people are doing, because these people are saying, well, we're going to take everything off you because you're not going to have private property. And our protection money are the sustainable development goals. But this, he said, this consultation included valuable work done by the Open Working Group of the General Assembly on Sustainable Development Goals and by the United Nations, whose Secretary General provided a synthesis report in December 2014. So in other words, they're contradicting themselves. They're saying that they had public engagement, and they didn't. They're saying it's all them.
What did his synthesis report say then?
That was in December 2014.
You should find out what that actually says, I wonder.
I think we could do. The thing is with this stuff is it all says pretty much the same thing, and that's the issue here. I think we're getting over, because when you read these websites, they all say the same thing. And those people we had at the beginning of the show, I don't know whether you heard that,
I did,
but these drones who sit in front of it, they sit there on Skype looking absolutely bored, reading this stuff off the screen, and then go, well, we're out of time now. You know, in other words, I've got something to do. I might want to eat or drink something. I want distraction now. I want to read the Daily Mail. I want to watch the X Factor. I don't really want to be doing this. I'm getting paid loads of money for it, though, but it is boring. You can actually see that's what they're thinking. Or they are that boring. You know, and that is possible. There's no doubt that is absolutely possible. But it says, our vision in these goals and targets, we're setting out a supremely ambitious and transformational vision. We envisage a world free of poverty, hunger, disease, and want, where all life can thrive. We envisage a world free of fear and violence, a world with universal literacy, a world with equitable and universal access to quality education at all levels, to health, care and social protection, where physical, mental and social well-being are assured, a world where we reaffirm our commitments regarding the human right to safe drinking water and sanitation, again controlling all of the assets, where there is improved hygiene and where food is sufficient, safe, affordable and nutritious, a world where human habitats are safe, resilient and sustainable, and where there is a universal access to affordable, reliable and sustainable energy. Now, all of that is the opposite of what they're actually imposing. They're imposing draconian control over everything, and water is not a human right. And they're saying that they're going to feed everybody, but what they're going to feed everyone on, because you're not allowed to have meat in this. This is the whole thing. Meat intake is not sustainable. So, in other words, we're going to have a whole world of vegetarians being fed on peasant food who can barely function. And that's what this is about, in my opinion, because they don't want people who can think, because bureaucrats and people in this system who are on these citizen work programs and being charged extortionate amounts of money and working their whole lives to live in somewhere that they'll never be able to afford, need to be dumbed down. And they're doing a pretty good job of that. But quite surprisingly, and I think they haven't predicted this, that the public are waking up to it, because it's been implemented clumsily and very quickly, because they're in a rush to do it.
Yes, I think that's true. I think the West elite are frightened of the growth of the East, China, and you know, the One Belt, One Road initiatives and so on, which there could be things wrong with them too, but I think the Western elites are desperate to exploit their own workers and super exploit the third world, and if they don't succeed in this, they'll be doomed. So we do have to act with understanding now.
Absolutely. We're nearly out of time for this week, but I'd just like to say that we want to do some talks this year. We're going to be attending several festivals. If anyone out there wants to put on an event with myself, Piers, and maybe a few other speakers, do let us know, because we'd like to get out and about doing that, and we are looking into doing it at the moment. We did some last year and they were very successful, and we were very surprised, and actually it was great to see that people out there did know about the show and they knew about Piers and Weather Action, of course.
Can I give you a little weather news advert?
Please.
People might have heard there's going to be another cold blast over Easter and into April. Now, we predicted this some time ago, and I can assure you again, it's nothing whatsoever to do with man-made climate change or carbon dioxide, but it's to do with the wavy jet stream which we predicted ages ago. So look out for a serious cold blast over the Easter weekend and into April. And to find out more about it, please go to weatheraction.com and subscribe to our forecasts, and you can be wiser for the whole year ahead.
Yes, that is very good information, and people who need it should go to your website, and most people do need it in a way, but we are really out of time, and yes, we're going to be covering much more next week as usual, and I think we've had a very interesting show today. Have you got anything to say in conclusion, Donny?
Just thanks to everyone. Thanks to you two gentlemen for the excellent information. I've enjoyed myself and got a lot from it. Looking forward to next week. Have a great week, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Tony.
Thank you.
Cheers, Piers. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers. Cheers, Tony.
Reversal of the poles in the past.